we are going to get into some more terms this week. Surprise, surprise. And we're going to start with lyrical poem because I can't remember if I covered it last week. And it kind of fits into this week's scheme where we'll get a couple more terms, but we'll also be looking at structures of poems. So a lyrical poem is simply a poem that expresses the speaker's emotions or thoughts. We might think of this as a love poem or a romance poem, and they do typically have that musical quality to them. So lots of different things that we could say about lyrical poems. Symbolism, one of our big terms, is understanding that an object represents both itself and something else inside of a work, right? So, for example, in Of Mice and Men, the dog is meant to represent Lenny, right? Can't remember that character's name right now, but that old man's dog, and how he loves it and how he takes care of it and how it loves him back. But ultimately, he's going to have to put it down because it's going to suffer if he doesn't. Is meant for us to represent Lenny, and both of them are a comfort and a burden to their quote unquote owner. So symbolism in poetry is obviously a little trickier because we don't have this kind of greater context. And so, like illusions, sometimes we have to understand that cultural symbols are always going to be present. So, the American flag is a great example of a symbol. It is a flag. It does stand for, our country, but it is also something that has a value, right? And it means something to some people, and it means something different to other people. And so when we think about that, symbols can become a little divisive. When we think about them in a cultural sense, because what it means to you and what it means to me might be a little different. We also have symbols as in like colors, right? That certain colors tend to represent certain things. And we understand those things as symbols. In our small culture, right? Red means stop, green means go, yellow means step on the gas. That's a joke. Don't do that. Be safe, drivers. So we kind of understand that, right? We understand those symbols. Just like, we understand that a rainbow is a rainbow and it's a lovely thing to see, but it also represents the LGBTQ plus population, right? So we kind of have these senses of, well, symbols are all around us. What do they mean? And obviously, a poem that's written in 1850 that talks about a rainbow isn't referring to the LGBTQ plus population, but one that's written today, we have to investigate, is that a symbol that we want? So again, like illusion, we have to be a little aware of the culture and the times. Hyperbole is over exaggeration. We use hyperbole all the time, which is actually not hyperbole because we use it very, very often. I like to think of it as like the fisherman who says, like, I caught a fish that's this big. They're always exaggerating, they're always adding a little something to it. When you tell a story, you're probably adding hyperbole in some places to make it more exciting. And we do that kind of naturally, right? When I talk about grades and I say, like, you have to worry about passing this class. Am I being hyperbolic? Am I adding something to that to make you a little more anxious, to try to motivate you a little bit? Maybe. Or I might just be being a straight shooter and being honest with you. So again, like, hyperbole is something you want to get to know. How do people speak? What are their patterns? I try not to be hyperbolic with students because I don't think it's very helpful. But other people really want to use hyperbole because they think it's a really good selling point. It's something that really adds something. So I kind of save my hyperbole for my writing, and not when I'm at a negotiating table or something like that. Understatement. We can kind of think of this as low key, but understatement is the opposite of hyperbole. We're underselling the importance of something. So, um, if you did really well on a test and the person right next to you didn't, and they're like, "How did you do?" You might be like, "Oh, I did okay." That's understatement, right? I did way better than okay. My example here is like if I got a 31 on the ACT, I'd be jumping for joy, right? But if my friend said like, I got a 21, I probably am not going to be like, well, I got a 31, right? That's a jerk thing to do. So I probably want to understate. I'm probably, oh yeah, well, that's not bad. I did pretty well. It's not true, but I'm underselling it. So we kind of do this to be polite. It's one way to think about it. We also do it to undercut like a problem. So if you have an F in a class and your parents are like, "How's your English class going?" You might be like, "Oh, it's not that bad," when in reality it is, right? And so you might do that kind of understatement to approach, "Oh, it's not that bad." Um, and to kind of push that agenda, right? So it can be a little self-sacrificing, or it can be a little get me out of trouble, right? So I also want to start getting us into some understanding of types of poetry. We did that last week with sonnets. So I thought we'd do a couple this week. One of my favorite kinds of poems are called found poems. And found poems are simply when uh, you are reading something that's not meant to be poetic at all. So typically nonfiction, and yet you notice that, oh, this is kind of an accidental poem. So what you are doing as the reader is bringing your insight into poetry into somebody else's work, and, and excuse me, what you're then taking from that is, I found a poem in somebody else's writing, which is kind of a neat little thing. Found poems. You can also kind of take someone else's writing and you can cut it a little bit. So maybe this stanza is in the first paragraph, and then another stanza is in the fifth paragraph. So I'm kind of cutting the piece together to make my found poem, but I'm still using the original author's language, which is really important. And maybe I'm adding things like line breaks or punctuation, especially commas. Um, again, I'm taking something that's not meant to be artful, and I'm turning it into art. Pretty neat, interesting kind of poetry, found poetry. A response poem is like what it sounds. You've read somebody's poem, and now you want to respond with your own poem, and you might want to think about who is their speaker and who is my speaker. Are they having a conversation with each other? Maybe we can match the tones together. Maybe we can match an expression or match a metaphor, or I can extend that metaphor, right? I think a common way that we might do this is we sometimes talk in metaphors, as we've talked about before. And so I was talking about privilege with one of my graduate student classes, and we were talking about people with privilege. It's like starting on third base in a baseball game, and so the whole class kind of used that metaphor of the baseball game to talk about privilege. And yeah, some people start out on third base. Some people don't even know the rules of the game, and so in a way, we're kind of using this thing to respond to the problem, right? And so a response poem can be a lot of different types of things. Obviously, if I'm just writing the poem, then I want to keep to something in the poem. So if I'm replying as the object of affection, and shall I compare thee to a summer's day, then what am I going to say back to that speaker, right? Am I going to say like, "You're crazy, your poem is not going to last all that long," and I can respond to that in sonnet form, right? That would be an interesting way to respond to a poem. That's where we're going to end it for this week. And we will pick up with some literary lenses maybe next week.